We have with us a fantastic panel, and I'm really excited because we're talking about our future, our joint future, our shared future. So, but at the same time, we have about 40 minutes to solve the world's biggest trend challenges, which is that of smart cities, and of course, the world's, I would say, most challenged issue on urban mobility. So in 40 minutes, I'm sure these issues cannot be solved. But I think we can take this panel as one, that raises some of the issues, the concerns, and perhaps, some thoughts to provoke us into thinking about how we want to create the future that we want to have. So with that, I think we've got already, Steffi, intro to our panel. So my question to you is, my first question to you is, a smart city promises to improve economic productivity, social well-being, and all of these things. And with some imagination, perhaps people in future do not need to engage in manual labor, and in fact, the mundane daily task could also be given to that of AI, robots, or the Internet of Things, right? Ideally, anyone could work from anywhere and perhaps even at any time. And with more free time, ideally, again, individuals would be able to pursue their hobbies, do what they love, and build on relationships, which we haven't been spending enough time on, right? But question is this a realistic vision? What is a smart city? What is a smart nation to you? What's your definition? How do we live tomorrow? And how does the city life change with digitization? Perhaps we can start with you, Mohit.
Oh, yeah, okay. I think there are lots of questions you have together there. I think let's put this in perspective here that and establish a protocol that there is no template for a smart city as such which we can follow, right? I think that is a very important fact. Smart city is also, I believe, is not a destination, but it is a journey. Now, Singapore as a nation has a Smart Nation initiative. The journey which Singapore will follow could be very different to the journey which Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, India, Bangladesh can follow, or any other European or US region. So I think if we keep this, if we agree on this protocol, I think the second thing is what you asked a question around what constitutes a smart city. So I would think it's very important again to define here, who are the key players who would define or constitute a smart city. So it will be people like us sitting in this room, outside there. There is a set of expectations we have. We want convenience, we want experience, we want relevancy. We have governments out there which will sort of play a part as a catalyst, in setting the infrastructure, setting the regulations, opening up the platform for other companies, private sector to come in and help in accelerating the growth of a smart city, and the service providers who would actually eventually need to relook at their value chain and get closer to their customer and provide a better experience.
Well, thank you, Mohit. If you could give me a picture of what a smart city may look like, what would it be? Maybe Fabian, since you've done some very exciting stuff this morning.
Okay, so let's kick off. Maybe let's kick it off by some footage, and then I'll reply to the question. So if Andy wants to play the video I gave you, it's a 13-second blob. So this just happened today. We flew over the Marina Bay, as you can unmistakably see, and that is great because that's the first time a Volocopter or an eVTOL, an air taxi, flies over an Asian city. There was a pilot in there at the request of the CAAS, the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore, and this was a very exciting moment for us because it does show that urban air mobility is a reality, right? It's not a concept. You see a lot of different studies and drawings. That was an aircraft that actually flew. So let's get going and build the infrastructure that we need to have those things land and take off. Going back to the question of what constitutes a smart nation, smart city, I think there's two levels to respond. There's a very personal and high level to respond to that. On the very high level and personal level, I'd say a smart nation is defined by a government that focuses, by population really, that focuses on education. And because people are educated and have a purpose in life, they will not go to war. And if they don't go to war, they'll not mess up this entire world. On a more professional and maybe more smart city base, it's all about having people move, right? Because if you can go places, you can get educated, you can also buy stuff, which will help the economy. And the gridlocks that we have in some cities today kind of hinder that. So what we're doing and what we're all doing really collectively on this panel, or trying to do at least, is try to unlock the gridlock that we have in some of the cities by adding more options and more choice. And I think Ritu made a really nice example of how mobility should be about choice, should be about, you know, the right solution for the right movement. And so in my very specific job, the air seems like a fantastic idea to utilize to get going, because on the ground, clearly it often sucks.
And Ritu, what is your vision and imagination of a smart city? What does a smart city mean to you?
When I think of a smart city, I've got a picture in my head, and it's one of a circular economy. I see one where all the power that's being produced is used within the city, so there's no excess supply or shortage. Sources of power are coming from within the city. So if people are running or cycling, or, I don't know, kids on a playground, they're generating power to keep that city alive. I think of a city where, sorry, in this case, Fabian, people don't need to move as much. So sitting at home, they're able to actually communicate and conduct their day jobs, consult a doctor without going anywhere. But if they do need to go, I love the idea of using all space available, whether it's air, whether it's road transportation, whether it's underground. And last but not least, it's a city that creates time and space for more human interactions. And that's one that I'd like to underline, but we can talk about that later.
I think I just want to add to what you just said. You know, obviously there are so many examples and so many areas where you know, things can improve with digitalization and the so-called smart technologies. But it's about you know, the people, how we're improving their quality of life for the day-to-day things which you know, they expected to do in living in a city. I think underline here is that smart technologies, or whatever we bring in as a solution towards smart city, has to improve the quality of life of people, and also do it such that it sets a sustainable cost and it's sustainable from an environment perspective, which over time will become a necessity as well, cities.
How do we ensure that? I mean, what is very heartening in this panel is that I hear that a smart city is not just about technologies. It is not just about, you know, getting things bigger, faster, cheaper, better, more convenient, or, you know, more accessible. But it's really about, you know, enabling lives, enabling choices. But how do we do that? I hear that, yes, you've got to educate people, give them, you know, because that's perhaps the leveler. Isn't that what Shakespeare said? So it still stands, yeah. But also, you know, the fact that the various kinds of technologies can actually make life or cities a lot more livable than what we have now. I guess that must be the trajectory that we're looking at, right? The question is, how do we make that happen? Who is responsible? Because today, you know, as we sit here and as we hear some of the conversations, not here, but also outside, what we hear a lot about is how do we get, you know, how do you have a raise up the value chain? How do we achieve, you know, better and better technology, higher and higher level of productivity? I don't hear a lot about how do we make life better and better on a very basic human needs or even aspirational level. How do we ensure that we move towards what we want rather than technology moving us ahead? Fabian, yeah.
Well, I think you focus on the people, right? You don't focus on any technology or anything. You focus on the people and the citizens, and if it helps the citizens, anything that helps the citizens and the people, then that's probably a sensible thing to implement. I'm going to hone it back to mobility and kind of disagree a little bit with Ritu here. I think a city becomes livable because it's moving, right? And you want to go out. If you want to settle, you go to the countryside and then you have a garden and you're kind of settled. The city is about movement, it's about getting around, it's about going to a restaurant, it's about going to anywhere. So it's about accessibility, it's about affordability as well. And so a city that is livable is one that thinks about its citizens and is affordable and livable and accessible as well. That's a lot of things. If I was able to solve all of that, I'd be a very well-paid consultant. But again, from my niche, mobility is one thing we can help with, but also making sure that the government is smart in implementing strategies and policies that last beyond 4 years or 5 years makes a lot of sense, and that's why I think Singapore, for instance, is fairly impressive, quite frankly.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with you here. I think it's the people who will define the strategy and not the technology for a smart nation. The real solutions which I believe, again, people would need to see in a smart city is, how much time we have reduced in our daily commute from home to work and back to home, right? That's a real issue. How much crime we have reduced in the city, how many lives we are saving, in a city of millions. I guess those are the real solutions we need to find through the data, through the technology, which delivers a real journey towards a smart city.
Ritu?
Just to take a slightly contrarian view.
Yes.
Yes, that's exactly we need. I don't disagree with what you're saying, but my view is urbanization as a trend is continuing, but technology will change that for the future, because people might actually want to live on a farm and might want to self-select to be out of that urban rat race or whatever you call it. That dense urban mobility is something that they would need if they lived there, but given technology, you would be enabled to live anywhere you want, to perform the job that you want, to have the lifestyle that you want, and still participate, at the same rate. Being in the city, though, once you've made that selection, I believe that we have government, we talked about that earlier, and policy playing a key role, but the private sector as well. The private sector and financial syndication, I think that was something we discussed earlier, Penny. Yeah. Financial syndication within the private sector to ensure that we're channeling the right capital to the right tools that are necessary to improve lives, not just necessary to buy everything we need or consumerism, but really ensuring that capital is directed also from a perspective of improving life quality.
How do we ensure that, clearly companies have shareholders to answer to. And, the drive towards creating more profit and higher valuation for the company will always be there. The pressure will always be there, right? So how do we ensure that it is not just about shareholders, but it's also about stakeholders, and it's about avoiding externalities? How does a company do that?
Today, that's very much, I believe, a topic in every single boardroom. It's a discussion everywhere that it's not just about pure profit for shareholders, but it is about purpose for stakeholders. It's purpose for your employees. It's purpose for beyond just your immediate stakeholders. It's also a purpose for community and society. And most organizations aspire to be sustainable providers of whatever product or service for their consumers, but also be positive contributors beyond just their immediate stakeholders. Be positive contributors towards the bigger community.
Yeah, but I think at the same time, I think there is a huge opportunity for private sector to actually make money out of it, right? I mean, If you just look at Singapore as an example, and according to one of the McKinsey studies, there are over 700 fintech companies which are based here, which is 43% of Southeast Asia fintech organizations. Now, there is a reason why they are here, and there is what they can contribute. So, I mean, if you look at in our day-to-day life, it is fair to say that as a customer, as a consumer, my daily needs, since the birth of smartphones, the traditional infrastructure is not able to meet my daily needs anymore. The governments may not have, the investment or even the skills, I would say, to actually, develop a master plan for a smart city. So they have to open up to the private sector. They have to bring in these new companies who all probably they can do is develop an ecosystem where companies can come in, innovate, and they regulate, and basically it's a win-win situation for the end customer, people like you and me, to provide that service, which is what we desperately need.
So whether it is, a smart nation, city infrastructure that we need to build, or a new mobility structure, urban transport planning, structure that we need to build, clearly it has to run on a very different business model from, say, the early 20th century, right? The days when we have horses and donkeys to transport our goods and people, to the days where, we use cars and motor vehicles, it requires a whole new set of traffic lights, fuel stations, different energy systems, and so on and so forth. It requires all of these things, and it requires urban planners, architects to also come in. In the same way, as we develop the new structure for the new normal, whether, like I said, it's urban transportation or in the case of a smart nation, what and how do we identify the players in this value chain? And is it going to be, the financial guys that will play the lead so that they could put together and syndicate, the whole value chain and support it and to underwrite the investments? Or is it the hardware companies, in other words, or the software companies, in other words, technology to drive the entire trajectory? Or is it, that the urban planners will play a much bigger role in determining what the outcome will look like? So, who would be the lead players and who would also, be the maestro of this orchestra?
From my perspective, I think the government does play an important role by laying a foundation with smart regulation in the sense that it allows innovation, right? We have a dilemma today where innovation cycles are increasingly shorter, and by definition, policy cycles are not necessarily very short. So that's a bit of a problem, right? Because you're always playing catching up. So one way
everything's happening at real time right now, right?
Sometimes,
there's a lot of data analytics that are fed into real-time systems and virtual realities. So there's going to be a lot of this, and if it's the government that's playing the lead role, and yet he's always playing the catch-up role, how do we reconcile with that?
Well, there's two things. So analyzing and utilizing data, that's really the task of smart people, and you can hire smart people, right? You have to be willing to invest. As a city, as a nation, you have to be willing to invest. Otherwise, it's not going to lead to much. And then there's the regulatory layer, where one approach to a smart regulatory layer is to define goals and not define ways, right? I worked for Uber for 4 years, and oftentimes taxi regulation is quite appalling because they mandate payments be done with $20 bills or something, right? Absolutely absurd, right? You could mandate payment be done, finished, right? That's the goal. And so you have the regulation, but you also have the investment from the government. I don't necessarily think it's the government's task to pick winners or pick certain players. You have to have competition, essentially.
Yeah, I think other than the governments, it is actually individual businesses who got to look at, what's out there, in terms of digitalization, where my consumer is going, what they're expecting, and to be ready to relook at their value chain, rework their processes, to reach out to the customer, leveraging all the capabilities which are available to bring that experience which they expect. So I think it comes down to individual businesses, and technology and data will actually play a part, but it has to come down to like a healthcare sector, transit sector, mobility, energy, water, waste. I think all these companies needs to step up and drive towards that experience journey for their customers.
I'd actually just use the example, I agree with the comments made earlier, I'd use the example of Singapore, where the government plays not just the role of setting the frame, and it's a broader frame, Fabian, to your point, so it allows the innovation within a frame, but it actually also acts in a consultative capacity to work together with organizations saying, these are the problems we want to solve for our citizens. If this is what we identify as making life better, and this is the congestion, or this is the problem we're solving, how do we do it? So it's that orchestra between absolutely private sector, for sure, because private sector is going to be working on it regardless. The business model is being disrupted, and not doing something is not an option. But it's private sector orchestrated together with the government, and the role of allowing innovation beyond just the existing private sector, and allowing that frame to let the Ubers of the world and let the disruptors of the world continue to a certain point, beyond which we have to now assimilate. I mean, the fragmentation is real. This industry is super fragmented. When we look at the urban mobility space, it is hugely fragmented, and I think it's needless to say there has to be consolidation. Loss-leading businesses can't continue forever. So at some point, where do you draw the line and say, this is where the consolidation has to occur? And is that going to be orchestrated purely by the private sector, or does the government step in?
So perhaps, this is a good point for us to ask the question to our audience. Who do you think should shoulder the primary role of being the maestro of this orchestra? Is it 3 options you have? You take a vote. Is it the government? That's always the big elephant in the room. Is it the private sector? And that would include the technologies and all of this. Of course, the financial guys as well. That's the private sector. Or is it the consumers who will drive, with their demand, with their collective demand? So let's take a vote, okay? Clearly, I know that a lot of you might say, oh, it's, all of this and so on. But if we have to say, we're going to be developing the city, you're the mayor of a city, right? So you're going to be developing this city, and you have to appoint someone or identify someone to be leading this change itself. Who would be the maestro? So, A, the government, hands up. Let's take a very quick count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Thank you. The private sector. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 23, 22, 23. Very close. You might be the deciding vote. And the consumers. Oh, just as many. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Slightly fewer. So the consumers still don't have all the bargaining power yet, right? So clearly, what we're seeing here, and I'm assuming there's going to be split votes here, right, is that we think the government and the private sector, in other words, the corporates, are still basically responsible for setting the stage for urban mobility as well as, a smart nation. Then I would, go back to my original question then. How do we then ensure that what they do is for the people and not just for profits? I understand from what Ritu has, alluded to, that these days corporates do have to report also on their CSR or, some of their social responsibilities. And a lot of the CEOs and the I would say, the drivers within these businesses are also for value creation, not just financial value, but also social value creation. But I'm not sure if this is the same for all companies and in different parts of the world. I think especially in certain economies, especially emerging economies, profit is still very much on top of their head. So, how do we, Fabian, you talk about education, so I have to come back to you. How do you educate them? Education takes a long time.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's a solid return on that investment, so you'll have to go through that. So just to go back to the question, I'm on the consumer side. If I had to pick one, it's impossible to pick one, Penny. Impossible.
They were very nice. Thank you very much.
It's a mix, but I'd have to pick the consumer because the consumer is all of the above also, right? I mean, every government employee or official is a consumer at the end of the day. So you're deciding with where you put your money, and that is still what feeds the world, whether you like it or not.
I mean, actually, I think it's a collaborative effort. It's very hard to say, I mean, going back on your question again, between consumer, private sector, governments, it has to be a collaborative effort. If governments and private sector advance and create digital solutions, without looking at what people are asking or people are expecting or people are needing, not looking at sort of a data and making sense of that data and just going on and delivering a solution, at the end of the day, the business is doomed to fail. So I think it has to be a collaborative effort, and what is a priority for a city, that needs to be driven and come out very clearly. Because yes, government will play a part in facilitating those priorities, funding it. Same way businesses will invest, private sector will invest and develop those solutions. People will benefit and people will use it. Ultimately, if there's a usage and adoption, business is successful. So I think it is a collaborative effort, not just we can't pick one or the other. That's just you.
Clearly, it has to be collaborative. The question is, whether we have the phenomena of everybody, somebody, and nobody. Right, but I hear you. At the end of the day, even with the maestro, the orchestra has to work together, right? Ritu, you have something to say?
I haven't voted yet.
Okay. Sorry, because I thought you had something to say, but so
I think it's the private sector, in my opinion. So that's the point I was making earlier. For me, the private sector has to take the lead. Our business model is being disrupted, whether we like it or not. And why I wouldn't say it's the consumer, I see what you're saying, but sometimes consumers don't know what's best. Not always, till they're shown what is even possible. Right? And so I think private sector has to take the lead. And when I say private sector, I'm talking tech, I'm talking big organizations, but I'm also talking financial intermediaries. I'm talking VCs, there's a number of you in the room. So how does Burda decide where to put its money? Where do they see value creation? So for me, the private sector is in the lead, but government must provide the frame. But if I had to pick one to take the lead, it would be private sector.
Thank you for that. I just want to go back to, Volocopter's experience, right? Because clearly what you have is something that most of us can only imagine. So thanks for the little clips early on. But in implementing that, clearly you would also have met up with a lot of regulatory issues, right, apart from technology issues. How do you work through those then? So
the beautiful thing about aviation is that you're generally greeted with optimism and euphoria to a certain extent. People enjoy the thought of flying over traffic. Who hasn't sat in a car and thought, I want to fly away? All of us. So you're right. Everything needs to be regulated, right? There's three things we need. We need the aircraft, we need the infrastructure, we need the traffic management, and then we need regulation for all of those. But it's mostly a step-by-step approach. It is working together, and that's been the case in aviation for a long time, where you have standard-setting bodies, you have norm-setting bodies that work together and figure out what's the best way to deal with that. So that's quite encouraging, and we're proactively being approached by cities and governments. So again, that's encouraging.
So in all of your experience, what would be the biggest challenges that you face in contributing to building this smart nation or smart mobility?
I'll continue in my very specific case. It'll be a short answer. It's public acceptance. It goes back to Ritu's point. You have to put something on the market that people want, right? There's no sense in pushing urban air mobility in our specific example, where there's no real need, right? But if you offer something that makes a lot of sense, then at the end of the day, that'll be taken up and it'll be used as well.
I think maybe I'll answer this question specific to Asia Pacific. Again, it's a very diverse market. We got to look at some factors such as not every country has the same infrastructure as Singapore, for example, right? So some of those challenges could come from legacy environments. They haven't really got the concept of moving towards smart nation. The needs are very basic at this stage, so there are infrastructure challenges. There could be affordability challenges in Asia. If the digital technology and the solution we are providing is not affordable to people, then it will be it's a big challenge in Asia. I think, yeah, so some of these, there is another, I think about 1.6 billion, if I'm not wrong, this from a statistics perspective, people who do not even have a bank account. So how do we address smart nation concept with them where people are not even financially literate to have a bank account? So these are some real challenges in Asia which needs to be addressed to make a significant difference as a society to move towards a smart city.
Okay.
I think that last point is actually pivotal, because if you see some of the smart nation experiments that have occurred in Asia, I use the word experiment, but let's say pilots, Songdo in Korea, some of the pilots that have taken place in Singapore itself, some of the other countries in Asia Pacific, they have to have the bases, the infrastructure, the technology, the very relevant bases. If you look at the mobility space, if we want to move towards autonomous driving, we need to have a grid, we need to have data, we need to be able to, we can put as much artificial intelligence in a car, but I doubt a car with as much artificial intelligence would be able to navigate the streets of Mumbai. So it's about having that base level of infrastructure, which again brings me back to the orchestration by governments to enable that first leap into smart mobility. Having said that, I was in India a few weeks ago and actually was having a conversation about this with some of our dealers. And one of them said to me, well, why do you worry about autonomous driving? I've never driven a car in my life. I have somebody who drives for me. So forget about this and worry about something else.
So different challenges in different areas. Do you have, in our drive towards a smart nation, do you have a personal concern about smart nations as we go towards, a faster but supposedly better world?
I definitely do. And if I may just put the audience on the spot here today, we've, in the last 20 years, I'd say all our lives have been massively disrupted by technology. Would we agree? I don't even get a nod here. This is a really tough crowd.
Yes.
Okay, a couple. Given that disruption, we're still all very time poor. We're still very time poor. We complain about time, even though we've had so much technology to enable so much of our lives. And what worries me about the future in a truly, truly smart perspective, smart nation, smart city, is if we create more time, will we actually utilize that time for things that are meaningful, the human interaction, the face-to-face, or will it be more time on a digital device? There's people in this room who haven't looked up from their phones the whole time. I'm sure they're taking notes, but that's okay. It's true, and that concerns me. Would it just alienate us more and more because all we're going to do is be more digitally connected, be more device dependent, and is it really truly going to add to quality of life?
And if I may add to that, in fact, the issue is not just about how we make use of the time. It's also about, what is the kind of culture that we're building up for society as we build the habits of just, looking at our mobile phones and connecting with each other only via the mobile phones. It becomes a faceless friendship. And our best friends are from, I don't know, is it Facebook or Instagram? I kind of feel a bit old when I say Facebook, but it could be Instagram or Snapchat or one of this, right? But we don't actually make time for each other by trying to meet each other face to face, So the longer impact of that on culture, I suppose, given a bit of that anthropology in me, right, is that relationship between people becomes thin, and it can become more and more transactional, which means that when you don't have emotions in there, you don't have a relationship in there, trust level goes down, and I think trust has a huge impact on our psychology, on our resilience, and all of these things. So it's not just, about how we make use of our time, it's the impact of where we choose to focus our energy, our time on, and the effect that it has on society that I think really worries me, right? I know Mohit, is bursting to say something.
No. I think I agree with both of you here, but I do think we are living in a world where we should not ignore, how technology can add value, right? I think if technology is used the right way, it can really help improve the quality of life of people living in the city. So when you have this discussion of social element, we are time poor. I mean, there is no discussion. Yes, we completely agree. Everyone faces the same, but we got to balance ourselves.
How do we make the choices then? How do we make the choices?
Choices
individuals do it. How do companies do it? How do government do it?
Then it goes back to individuals and people, right? What they choose to actually adopt to, right? And everyone is different. All the consumers sitting here in this room are different. They have different perspective. So what you choose to adopt to, because that is actually valuable and adding value to your lifestyle, I think this factor cannot be ignored. I mean, as I said earlier that, have we reduced the crime rate? If we can reduce the crime rate by some sort of a good monitoring system, policing system, preventative measures there, it is helping the community. Why will anybody say, no, it is not a good thing because it is associated with the technology? So I think the technology has to be put into the use, and people who are willing to adopt, because it works for them and helps them, I think it should be considered equally as we move along the way.
Question is, whether it is a case of mindfulness or mindfulness, right? As in, are we mindful about the choices and the habits that we're building up? As in, mindful, or is it that because of all this, opening up of horizon, of course, then staying curious and trying to acquire all the information, knowledge, and of course, there's this thing called a herd instinct as well, and crowd behavior. Then we become mindful, as in mindful, right? So is it mindfulness or mindfulness, right? How do we ensure that? Back to you, Fabian. Education again, right? So how do we ensure that that the right mindfulness is cultivated? In a smart nation.
I don't know, I was primarily nodding at your, I like it, I'll take it over, mindfulness and mindfulness. It comes down to choice, every individual choice. I mean, Ritu, Mohit, would we sit in the audience, would we look at the phone, or would we look at the people? I don't know. I have some second thoughts about that. So it's all down to individual choices. Companies are individual and people, governments are individuals and people, so it's the sum of that. And yes, maybe I can drive it back to education.
And if, given that we have just, 1.5 minutes, perhaps my question back to you as we have started is, what then is your one big wish for the future that you're creating, that you're co-creating? And if you could paint a very quick picture of the future, what would it look like? I'm giving you a blank canvas now. Anyone could start.
I'll go first, right? I'll look stupid. So I cannot paint well, so my picture wouldn't be pretty. It would be full of peace, though. I need to come back to that. And it would be full of people actually talking to each other. That's right, yeah.
Okay, and do you have a chief concern about that? Or you're happy when people talk more?
I have some concerns, yeah, if you look around the world right now. I'm not going to name them, but...
Okay.
I think my one thing there would be that if we think about, already overpopulated cities we have, and in the future, it's going to get even more populated. So I think whatever we do has to improve the quality of life of people living in the city, as well as we do so in a sustainable way for the environment. I think this would be, I would think, would be really important.
Thank you. And Ritu, you have the last words. What is the picture that you paint for the future that you're co-creating, and your one big wish?
I go back to the original smart city picture I painted. It's green, there's blue skies, so it is clean environment. This is a city, so it could be anywhere. It could be downright in the middle of, I don't know, Beijing. And it is a city that allows people to utilize the resources that they create. So it is self-sustaining. There's no wastage, there's no excess. It does have a huge amount of space in mind because you've freed up time, you're not stuck in congestion, you're not worried about things that can, as you said, outsource menial tasks. Give those away, create opportunities for truly value-adding, and that value-adding has to start with human interaction right in the center.
Okay, what Ritu said then, yeah, I'll read.
That's easy. You see, I did talk about a bandwagon effect. My picture, I wish it's utopian, but then again, what is utopia? For me, first I want you to help me thank all our panelists. It's not an easy topic, especially to be able to say it in the way that they have. And I think for me, to sum this up, what is important in the development towards a smart city, and in particular in Singapore, a smart nation, to me is to really put the human at the center of it. But when we say this, it is almost cliche. So what does it mean? 5 years ago, I was on a panel on Smart Nation. This was in France, I believe. And in that session itself, the person who was responsible for developing a smart city, was very proud to say that he has installed cameras along this really busy road. It's like the Champs-Élysées of Paris, or in the case of Singapore, Orchard Road. And he said that, with the installation of these sensitive cameras, what happens is if a person suffers a sudden heart attack, falls onto the ground, it would actually alert the camera, captures the data, sends it to the ambulance, to the hospital activates the ambulance comes and saves lives. That's what it would do. That's what the Internet of Things is about. And it's fantastic. That's what, a smart nation or a smart city can do, right? Smart technology can do. And it sounds all fantastic until I sat there and thought about it. Wow, I would really hate to live in such a city. Because if I fall onto the ground, the first thing I hope will happen is a fellow passerby in a busy street to just come to me and see if I'm all right, give me the emotional support, and perhaps he or she could perform CPR or make the call, to the ambulance. Instead of them passing and saying, oh, you know what, I better not touch her because, in case it gets me into any legal liability. Anyway, the camera is there, they should be able to pick her up, so it should be fine, but let's watch what will happen. That's where I don't want to end up. I hope the reverse would happen. So once again, thank you to the panel, and thank you to you, the audience, and thank you, DLD, for bringing us here. Thank you.